Aikin had never been like the other men at the anger management meetings. They were there to tame their demons, to find peace in the chaos of their own minds. He was there for a different reason. He didn't seek peace. He didn't believe in redemption. He simply needed control. Emotions were a weakness, a liability that dulled the edge of the blade. He had spent his life ensuring his hand never wavered, his judgment never faltered. A contract killer with a steady hand and a clear mind was far deadlier than one ruled by rage. He never spoke more than necessary. While the other men spilled their guts about their childhood traumas, broken relationships, and the moments of weakness that had cost them everything, Aikin sat in silence. He listened, but he didn't relate. Their struggles were foreign to him. Their pain was not his. He had no past worth lamenting, no regrets to weigh him down. The only thing that mattered was the mission, the next job, the next target. He had been a ghost for as long as he could remember. Even those who hired him didn't know his face. He moved through the world like a shadow, unseen and forgotten the moment he was gone. His name wasn't real, just a label given to him by the men who had raised him. Aikin. I can, a name meant to remind him that failure was never an option. He had been bred for war, trained from childhood to be a weapon sharper than any blade. He knew how to kill in 1,000 different ways, how to make it clean or messy, painful or swift. But this wasn't about a contract. This wasn't business. This was something else. The anger meetings had been a routine, something he attended without expectation. But then Paul, the group leader, stopped showing up. At first, no one thought much of it. Paul was the kind of man who disappeared now and then, only to return with a new philosophy, a new lesson to share. He believed in change, in the ability to shape one's destiny. Aikin had never believed in such things, but he respected Paul for trying. As the weeks passed, murmurs of Paul's absence turned into whispers of something darker. No one knew where he had gone. No one had heard from him. And in a city like this, where people vanished all the time, that silence meant something. Aikin followed the whispers. He moved through the back streets, listening, watching. The search took him to places most people would never dare to tread, drug dens where lost souls bartered their bodies for another fix, alleyways littered with the discarded remnants of broken lives, brothels where desperation clung to the air like cheap perfume. Eventually, the trail led him to a name. A woman. A prostitute Paul had been trying to help. She lived in a crumbling apartment complex on the edge of the city, a place so soaked in misery that the walls themselves seemed to weep. Aikin found the building easily enough. The stench hit him before he even entered. It was more than just the usual filth, the urine, the sweat, the mold that clung to every surface. This was something deeper, something worse. The smell of death. He climbed the stairs slowly, his boots making no sound against the rotting wood. The hallway was a graveyard of abandoned things, discarded needles, crumpled cigarette packs, empty bottles. He passed doors with peeling paint, hearing muffled cries and laughter behind them, lives unraveling in the dark. But none of that mattered. The door he sought was slightly ajar. It hadn't been forced. It hadn't been locked. It was as if someone had left it open, inviting him in. He stepped inside. The room was dark, but the stench was overwhelming. It filled his lungs, thick and rancid, curling in his stomach like spoiled meat. The only light came from the broken blinds, casting thin slats of illumination across the floor. And there, in the center of the room, was Paul. Or what was left of him. His body had bloated, his skin stretched and split, leaking fluids that had seeped into the carpet, leaving dark, wet stains. His face was barely recognizable, his eyes eaten away by insects, leaving empty sockets that gaped at the ceiling. His lips had pulled back in death, exposing yellowed teeth in a grotesque grin. His fingers were curled, stiff with rigor mortis, his hands frozen in a silent plea. Maggots wriggled in the open wounds, feasting on what remained. Flies buzzed in thick clouds, landing and lifting, their legs carrying decay from flesh to floor. The air was thick with the sickly sweet rot of decomposition, a scent that clung to the walls, the ceiling, everything. Aikin stood over the corpse, unmoving. He had seen death in all its forms. He had delivered it with precision, with artistry. But this wasn't just death. This was abandonment. This was erasure. Paul had been left to rot, forgotten like garbage. Aikin felt something stir in his chest. Not grief. Not sorrow. He didn't have the luxury of those emotions. But there was something else, something darker. Rage. Paul had deserved better. Aikin clenched his fists, his breath slow and measured. Someone had done this. Someone had taken a good man and reduced him to this. And whoever they were, they had made a mistake. Because Aikin was going to find them. And when he did, they wouldn't just die. They would suffer.